First in India. Male. Who is the first governor of Bengal? Robert Clive or Lord Clive, 1757–60. Who is last governor of Bengal? Warren Hastings, 1772–74. Who is the first Governor General of Bengal? Warren Hastings, 1774–85. Who is the first Governor General of India? Lord William Bentinck, 1833–35. Who is the last Governor General and first Viceroy of India? Lord Canning, 1856–62. Who is the first President of the Indian National Congress? Vyomesh Chandra Banerjee, or W.C. Banerjee. From 1885 to 1933, the presidency had a term of 1 year only. Who is the first and last Indian Governor General of independent India? C. Rajagopalachari, the 21st of June 1948 to the 25th of January 1950. Who is the first Indian to pass ICS? Satyendranath Tagore, 1863. The first exam for Indian civil services was held in London 1855 and not a single Indian went there to give the exam. Satyendranath Tagore, the elder brother of Rabindranath Tagore, became the first Indian to qualify for the Indian civil service in 1863. He was allocated the Bombay Presidency as his cadre. Who is the first Indian ICS officer? Satyendranath Tagore, 1864. He is civil servant, poet, composer, writer, social reformer and linguist. Known for first Indian to be an ICS officer, present-day equivalent to IAS officer, Indian feminist movement. Who is the first Governor General of India, after independence and the last British Governor General of India? Lord Louis Mountbatten, the 15th of August 1947 to the 20th of June 1948. He was a British statesman, naval officer, colonial administrator, and close relative of the British royal family. Mountbatten, who was of German descent, was born in the United Kingdom to the prominent Battenberg family. Who is the first Indian cosmonaut to go into space? Rakesh Sharma. He was the first Indian astronaut who embarked on an unparalleled journey through space in 1984. His cosmic voyage unfolded through a joint collaboration between ISRO and the Soviet Interkosmos space program alongside 2 Soviet cosmonauts. Who is the first temporary president of the Constituent Assembly? Dr. Sachidananda Sinha. Who is the first Commander-in-Chief of Free India? General Kodandera Madappa Kariyappa, also known as K.M. Kariyappa, the 28th of January 1899 to the 15th of May 1993, was an Indian military officer and diplomat who was the first Indian Commander-in-Chief, C.in.C., of the Indian Army. Who is the first Indian Nobel laureate? Rabindranath Tagore was the first person from India and the first person from Asia to win the Nobel Prize in 1913. The Nobel Prize in Literature was granted to him in honor of his work Gitanjali. Tagore was born in Kolkata, India. Who is the first Indian judge of the International Court of Justice? Dr. Nagendra Singh. Maharajshri Nagendra Singh was an Indian lawyer and administrator who served as President of the International Court of Justice from 1985 to 1988. He was one of the 4 judges from India to have been judges of the International Court of Justice in The Hague. Who is the first Indian to get the Bharat Ratna Award? Dr. Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan. The Bharat Ratna Award was constituted in 1954. Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan was the first Vice President of India. Who is the first Field Marshal? General S.F.J. Manekshaw. Field Marshal is equivalent to Admiral of the Fleet in the Indian Navy and Marshal of the Indian Air Force. Who is the President of the Constituent Assembly? Dr. Rajendra Prasad. Sachidanand Sinha was the first President of the Constituent Assembly. Later, Dr. Rajendra Prasad was elected its President. Who is the first Indian to swim across the Indian Channel? Mihir Senator was a famous Indian long-distance swimmer and lawyer. He was the first Asian to conquer the English Channel from Dover to Calais in 1958. And did so in the 4th fastest time, 14 hours and 45 minutes. He was the only man to swim the oceans of the 5 continents in one calendar year, 1966. Who is the first Indian to get Jananpith Award? G. Sankara Kurup. The first recipient of the award was the Malayalam writer G. Sankara Kurup, who received the award in 1965 for his collection of poems, Odakujal, The Bamboo Flute, published in 1950. Who is the first Muslim president of the Indian Republic? Zakir Hussain. Zakir Hussain was the third president of India from the 13th of May 1967 until his death on the 3rd of May 1969. Who was the first Indian to win Palk Strait Ocean Swimming Contest? Badryanath Nath. Who is the first Speaker of Lok Sabha? Ganesh Vasudev Mavalankar, 1952-57. Popularly known as Dadasaheb, was an independence activist, the President, from 1946 to 1947, of the Central Legislative Assembly, then Speaker of the Constituent Assembly of India, and later the first Speaker of the Lok Sabha. Who was the first person to make a printer press popular in India? James Augustus Hickey was an Irishman who launched the first printed newspaper in India, Hickey's Bengal Gazette. Who was the first Education Minister of independent India? Maulana Abul Kalam Azad. His birthday, which is the 11th of November, is celebrated as National Education Day. The first Education Minister of India after independence was Maulana Abul Kalam Azad. Who was the first President of the Indian Republic? Rajendra Prasad, the first President of India, is the only person to have held office for 2 terms. 7 presidents have been members of a political party before being elected. Who was the first Prime Minister of independent India? Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru was India's first Prime Minister, serving as Prime Minister of the Dominion of India from the 15th of August 1947 until the 26th of January. Who was the first Home Minister of independent India? Vallabhbhai Jhaverbhai Patel, commonly known as Sardar Vallabha Patel, was an Indian independence nationalist and barrister who served as the first Deputy Prime Minister and Home Minister of India from 1947 to 1950. Who was the first Vice President of independent India? Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan was an Indian politician, philosopher, and statesman who served as the second President of India from 1962 to 1967. He previously served as the first Vice President of India from 1952 to 1962. He was the second Ambassador of India to the Soviet Union from 1949 to 1952. Who was the first Indian Air Chief of India? Air Marshal Subrata Mukherjee was the first Indian Chief of Air Staff. His tenure lasted for a year, starting from April 1, 1954, till March 31, 1955. Who was the first Chief of Army Staff of the Indian Army? General Maharaj Shri Rajendra Singhji Jadeja, also known as K.S. Rajendra Singhji, was the first Chief of Army Staff of the Indian Army, and the second Indian, after Field Marshal K.M. Kariyappa, to become Commander-in-Chief of the Indian Army. Who was the first Chief of Naval Staff of India? Admiral Ram Das Katari was an Indian Navy admiral who served as the third Chief of the Naval Staff from the 22nd of April 1958 to the 4th of June 1962. He was the first Indian to hold the office and succeeded the last British officer to the post, Vice Admiral Sir Stephen Hope Carlyle. Who was the first Chief of Defence Staff of India? General Bipin Rawat, 63, who died tragically in a helicopter crash on December 8, was India's first Chief of Defence Staff, CDs, and longest-serving general. Who was the first person to get Param Veer Chakra? Major Somnath Sharma, the 31st of January 1923 to the 3rd of November 1947, was an officer of the Indian Army, and the first recipient of the Param Veer Chakra, PVC, India's highest military decoration, which he was awarded posthumously. Who was the first Indian scientist to get the Nobel Prize? Chandrasekhara Venkat Raman. Sir Chandrasekhara Venkat Raman was an Indian physicist known for his work in the field of light scattering. Using a spectrograph that he developed, he and his student K.S. Krishnan discovered that when light traverses a transparent material, the deflected light changes its wavelength and frequency. Who was the first scientist of Indian origin to get the Nobel Prize in the field of medical science? Har Gobind Khorana was an Indian-American biochemist. While on the faculty of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, he shared the 1968 Nobel Prize for Physiology. Who was the first Chinese pilgrim who visited India? Faxian, also spelt as Fa Hien, was the first Chinese traveler to visit India in the early 5th century. The purpose of his visit was to look for texts sacred to Buddhism. Who was the first scientist of Indian origin to win a Nobel Prize in Physics? Subramanian Chandra Shekhar was an Indian-American theoretical physicist who spent his professional life in the United States. He shared the 1983 Nobel Prize for Physics with William A. Fowler for theoretical studies of the physical processes of importance to the structure and evolution of the stars. Who was the first National Security Advisor of India? Brajesh Mishra, then Principal Secretary to the Prime Minister, was appointed as the first National Security Advisor of India. The post was created on the 19th of November 1998 by the government headed by Atal Bihari Vajpayee. In 2004, a new government headed by Manmohan Singh was formed at the center. Who was the first Indian who won the Stalin Award? Saifuddin Kichu was an Indian independence activist, barrister, politician, and later a leader of the peace movement.